What if everything you thought you knew about this family was only half the story? And what if one reaction, one look, one moment exposed the truth that has been hidden for years? Because tonight, we are breaking down the scene that changed everything. The silence that spoke louder than words, and the realization that reconciliation was never really on the table. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Stay with me, because this moment rewrites the entire story, and the truth behind it explains everything. The moment begins quietly, but it does not stay that way, because sometimes the loudest truths arrive without warning, and when they do, they change everything. And this is one of those moments where the camera did not need to zoom in and no dramatic music was required, because the reaction said more than words ever could. And when the question was asked about the possibility of rebuilding what was lost, the answer came instantly and repeatedly, and every response landed the same way: firm, closed, final. And even before the explanation arrived, the truth had already surfaced, because faces do not lie, even when words try to soften what is really being felt. And that is why this moment matters so much, because it exposed a divide that has existed beneath the surface for years, and it forced viewers to confront something uncomfortable, that the story we have been shown may never have been the full story. And when Michael T. reacted to that scene, it felt like a release, like someone finally said what so many people had been thinking but could never quite articulate. And the frustration in her voice was not sudden, it was layered and built over time, and the more she spoke, the clearer it became that this was not about one conversation or one episode or one disagreement. This was about a pattern that had been forming quietly for more than a decade, and that pattern had consequences. Because relationships do not collapse overnight, they erode slowly, through choices, through silence, through moments where someone feels unseen and unheard and pushed aside. And what Michael T. and Tony revealed in their discussion was not meant to shock for the sake of attention. It was meant to explain why the idea of a reunion feels impossible for so many involved, and why the resistance is not rooted in anger, but in protection. Because there is a difference between being open to healing and being forced into proximity with someone who represents years of emotional strain. And when that distinction is ignored, the damage only deepens. And this is where the narrative shifts, because for a long time, viewers were encouraged to believe that reconciliation was always just one conversation away, that if everyone could sit down and talk things through, the family could return to what it once was. But what this moment makes clear is that the past cannot be revisited without acknowledging what actually happened. And for many of the children, what happened left marks that never fully healed. And when those experiences are dismissed or minimized, it reinforces the very reason distance was created in the first place. And that is why the reactions were so strong, because this was not about refusing to forgive, it was about refusing to pretend. And the tension in that scene came from the realization that the desire for unity was not shared equally, and that while some were open to reconnecting, others were content with how things are now. And that imbalance tells its own story, because reconciliation requires mutual willingness and mutual accountability. And when one side holds the power and the narrative, the other side eventually stops trying and chooses peace over participation. And what Michael T. articulated so clearly is that many of the kids are not opposed to having a relationship with their father. They are opposed to being placed back into an environment where they felt like outsiders in their own family. And that feeling does not fade just because time passes, because memory is not erased by silence. And when Tony added his perspective, it reinforced the idea that this was not about creating drama, it was about naming reality. And reality is that certain dynamics caused harm, and until that harm is acknowledged, moving forward together is not possible. And the reason this resonates so deeply with viewers is because it mirrors experiences many people have lived through. Situations where they were expected to endure discomfort for the sake of keeping the peace, and eventually realize that peace built on silence is not peace at all. And that realization changes how you see everything that came before, because scenes that once felt confusing now feel revealing, and moments that were brushed aside now carry weight. And once that shift happens, the entire story transforms because it becomes less about who left and more about why they felt they had to. And this is only the beginning, because as this conversation continues, deeper truths emerge, truths that challenge long-held assumptions and force a reckoning with what has been hidden in plain sight. And that is why this moment holds so much power, because it is not just commentary, it is confirmation. And once confirmation arrives, there is no returning to the version of the story that made denial comfortable. And this is where the real story begins. The deeper this conversation goes, the clearer it becomes that what we are witnessing is not a sudden fallout, but the final stage of something that has been unfolding quietly for years. Because when people finally speak with this level of certainty, it is never impulsive. It is the result of long observation, long restraint, and long reflection. And that is exactly what makes these revelations so powerful, because they are not fueled by emotion alone. They are fueled by memory, and memory carries details that cameras often miss. And as Michael T. continued breaking down that moment, what stood out was not just what was said, but what was implied. Because when someone reacts with complete emotional shutdown to the idea of reconnection, it suggests that the door was closed long before the question was ever asked. And that realization reframes everything, because it means the public conversation was always behind the private reality. And that gap between performance and truth is where the real damage lives. And Tony recognized it immediately, because he did not focus on the words. He focused on the energy, the body language, the absence of warmth. And that absence speaks volumes, because genuine openness cannot be faked. And when it is missing, it reveals more than any rehearsed statement ever could. And this is where the tension intensifies, because it becomes impossible to ignore the pattern that has repeated across seasons. Moments where reconciliation was discussed in theory but resisted in practice. Moments where unity was spoken about while distance was enforced. And over time, those contradictions accumulate and create confusion, especially for children who are trying to understand where they belong and what they are allowed to expect. And when expectations are repeatedly unmet, people stop hoping, because hope without change becomes painful. And that is why this conversation matters so deeply, because it highlights how emotional fatigue sets in, not through one major event, but through hundreds of small disappointments and unmet needs. And what Michael T. articulated was not bitterness, it was awareness, the kind that comes when you finally stop explaining your pain to people who refuse to hear it, and instead choose to honor it yourself. And that shift is profound, because it marks the point where survival becomes the priority and connection becomes conditional on safety. And this is where the idea of forced togetherness completely collapses, because healing cannot occur in an environment that recreates the harm. And that truth is uncomfortable, but necessary. And Tony added another layer by pointing out something that often gets overlooked, that family does not require uniformity, it requires respect. And that respect was compromised when certain voices were consistently sidelined and certain experiences were minimized. And once that happens, the structure may remain intact, but the foundation is cracked, and no amount of public unity can repair private fractures. And this is why the conversation around possible reunions feels hollow to those who lived through the breakdown, because for them, the issue was never logistics, it was trust. And trust, once broken, does not return simply because time has passed. And what makes this even more impactful is the realization that many of the children were navigating these dynamics at ages where emotional development is especially sensitive, and the impressions formed during those years shape how safety is understood. And when safety is disrupted repeatedly, it rewires expectations. And that is why the reactions are so firm now, because they are rooted in self-preservation, not defiance. And when viewers hear this perspective, it resonates because so many people recognize the feeling of being asked to return to spaces that once caused harm simply because others want closure. And that pressure is unfair because closure cannot be demanded, it must be earned. T and Tony made clear is that accountability has been missing, and without it, reconciliation is not just unlikely, it is unrealistic. And the suspense in this moment comes from the question of what happens next. Because once truth is spoken publicly, it cannot be taken back. And the narrative shifts, whether everyone is ready for it or not. And this shift challenges the audience to reconsider long-held assumptions about who was resisting and why. Because resistance often looks like stubbornness from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like survival. And that understanding changes everything because it forces us to ask not why they will not come back, but why they would want to. And that question has no easy answer because it requires confronting uncomfortable realities about power dynamics, emotional neglect, and the cost of silence. And as this conversation reaches its peak, the realization settles in that the family did not fall apart because of one person or one decision, but because of a system that prioritized appearance over authenticity and control over compassion. And once that system is exposed, the only path forward is honesty, even when it is inconvenient. And that is the moment we are witnessing now, a moment where truth finally steps out from behind the curtain and demands to be acknowledged. And once that happens, there is no returning to the version of the story that made everyone comfortable. And that is why this part of the story is so compelling, because it is not about shock, it is about clarity. And clarity, once achieved, changes how every past moment is understood and sets the stage for whatever comes next. Because after this, nothing can remain the same.